You know, there's something curiously beautiful about a creature that walks alone. Not because it is antisocial or wounded or hiding from the world, but because it has discovered a rhythm of being that does not require an audience to make sense. A lone wolf does not wander the forest, declaring itself free. It is free by virtue of simply moving the way nature intended it to move, without apology, without seeking permission, without the slightest need for applause. And perhaps that is why you are here, listening to this, sensing that somewhere in your own mind there is a wildness that has been waiting not to run away, but to run true. You see, most of us were taught from childhood that freedom is something you earn, or fight for, or ask for politely, like waiting in line for a ticket. But that is not how the universe works. That is not how consciousness works. Freedom is not something given, it is something realized. And anything realized cannot be taken away. To be controlled, you must first believe there is someone out there who holds a leash attached to your sense of self. But what happens when you begin to recognize deeply, softly, unmistakably, that your sense of self is not a fixed thing at all? Not a stone statue, but a flowing stream. A piece of music that cannot be frozen. A breath that cannot be contained. Then the leash slips away, and you discover it was made of paper all along. I sometimes laugh, gently, at how frightened we are of being alone with our own minds. We imagine that silence is empty, when in fact, silence is where everything is born. You cannot hear the melody of your own being when the world is shouting instructions at you. You cannot feel the rhythm of your own soul if you are endlessly adjusting yourself to the expectations of others. And so you come to this peculiar point in your journey, a moment that feels accidental on the surface. Yet nothing is ever really accidental where the universe whispers, "Come, sit, listen." The wolf in you has something to say. But of course, the wolf is not a creature of aggression or dominance. As some imagine, the wolf, in the spiritual sense, is the part of you that is awake, alert, able to sit still and perceive the world without collapsing into fear. A wolf stands quietly in a clearing and simply sees. It does not ask the trees to be taller, the wind to be softer, the moon to shine at a different angle. It allows things to be as they are, not out of resignation, but out of profound understanding. And once you train your mind to do the same, well, that is when no one can truly control you anymore. For you cannot manipulate someone who is at peace with themselves. You cannot intimidate someone who understands the nature of fear. You cannot imprison someone whose spirit moves like water. Ah, yes, water, always my favorite metaphor. People often miss its wisdom because water does not announce itself with thunder. Water simply is. It yields, and yet it is unstoppable. It adapts, and yet it shapes mountains. It takes the form of whatever holds it, yet nothing can hold it forever. And in the same way, a mind trained like a lone wolf learns to move like water quietly, naturally, without rigidity, without needing to resist or attack. Control only works on people who believe they must resist to be free. But once you see that freedom is simply the ability to move with your own nature, control dissolves the way snow melts in your palm. Most suffering comes from the illusion that you are a separate ego imprisoned inside a little bag of skin, defending itself against a big foreign universe. This is perhaps the greatest trick the mind ever played on itself. And when you believe this illusion, you become terribly easy to control. People push your buttons, and you react because you believe the buttons are you. But the moment you truly see, that your mind is not an isolated fortress, but a wave in the great ocean of being, then the game changes. A wave does not fear another wave. A wave does not need approval. A wave is not afraid of crashing, because crashing is also part of the dance. Imagine, for a moment, that your life is a great symphony, but you have been trained to listen only to the drums. So every time the world strikes them, boom, you jump. Someone criticizes you, and boom, someone withdraws affection, and boom, someone disapproves, and boom, and you think, my entire being is shaking. But what if you step back, breathe, open your awareness, and suddenly the drums are only one small part of the orchestra, and beyond them you hear violins, flutes, cellos, the whole sky humming with harmony. The drums don't disappear, they simply lose their power to define the experience. This is what happens when you train your mind like a lone wolf. You are no longer limited to the narrow band of noise that once dictated your emotions. You begin to sense a wider awareness, the space within which thoughts arise and dissolve. And the moment you see that thoughts are just clouds drifting across the sky of your mind, well, you stop taking them quite so personally. You stop obeying them as if they were sacred commandments. You stop fearing them as if they were prophecies. You begin to play with them, the way a wolf plays with wind. The curious thing is, this people around you may not like this transformation, not because you have become dangerous or rebellious, but because you have become unpredictable in the most peaceful way. Someone who cannot be controlled frightens those who depend on control to feel secure. They mistake your freedom for distance, your calm for indifference, your inner stillness for coldness. But that is because they are not used to someone being centered within themselves. They are used to people reacting, conforming, explaining, apologizing. But the lone wolf does not explain. The lone wolf simply is, and the beauty of being is that it requires no justification. You see, the paradox of control is that it always depends on your cooperation. Someone can only pull your strings if you believe you have strings. But once you return to the simple, in original awareness, the awareness you had before you learned your name, your fears, your insecurities, then you realize you are not a puppet dancing on a stage. You are the sky in which the stage exists, and no one controls the sky. When you understand this, you don't become arrogant. You don't become superior. You become gentle, soft, spacious. You begin to laugh at the absurd seriousness with which the world tries to convince you to play roles you never agreed to. And the laughter isn't mocking, it's liberating. It's the laugh of someone who has woken from a dream and does not resent the dream for being what it was. A mind trained like a lone wolf does not cling. It does not chase. It does not bark at shadows. It moves with clarity, like a dancer who finally hears the music under the noise. And perhaps this is why so many people feel drawn to videos, talks, messages like the one you're listening to now. Because somewhere inside you, beneath the noise, beneath the anxieties, beneath the social masks, there is a quiet knowing that says, yes, this is what I truly am. And so here you are, not by accident, never by accident. Even your suffering brought you here. Because suffering is often the sound of a mind resisting its own awakening. When you stop resisting, when you let yourself feel what you feel, the suffering becomes a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is the wolf mind, the water mind, the free mind, the mind no one can control. So let us wander a little deeper into this forest of awareness, where the wolf walks without hurry and the trees themselves seem to breathe in rhythm with your own chest. You may notice, if you pay close attention, that the mind has a habit of imagining itself as separate from the world, as if you are standing here and the forest is over there, and the sounds of wind rustling through the leaves belong to something other than you. But this division is a trick of language, not a truth of reality. When you breathe in, the forest becomes your lungs. When you breathe out, you become the forest's breath. This is not poetry. It is simple observation. And once you begin to sense this unity, even faintly, you'll find that control, the idea of being controlled, the fear of being controlled begins to lose its meaning. Because how can one wave control another wave? How can one moment of the universe dominate another? The entire notion arises only when you imagine yourself as a fixed object moving through time, instead of time moving through you. When you imagine yourself as a separate identity struggling to maintain itself in a chaotic world, you feel fragile, defensive, reactive. But when you feel yourself as part of the great movement, the pulse of everything, you no longer ask how to defend yourself. You simply flow. People often misunderstand the lone wolf as a symbol of isolation. But isolation is not the same as solitude. Isolation is an escape from the world. Solitude is an embrace of the world. Isolation is fear. Solitude is clarity. Isolation shrinks you. Solitude allows you to feel the vastness of your own consciousness. The lone wolf is not running away from the world, but is deeply attuned to it, aware of every sound, every shift of the wind, every scent carried through the air. Its aloneness is not emptiness. It is fullness without clutter. And when your mind becomes like this, when your inner space becomes open, uncluttered, aware manipulation simply has nowhere to attach itself. If someone shouts at a mountain, the mountain does not shrink. It does not negotiate. It does not tremble. It simply reflects the sound back, transformed by distance, softened by time. When your mind attains this quality, spacious, grounded, unmoved by unnecessary noise, then you begin to sense what I mean by freedom. Not the freedom of rebellion, but the freedom of nature itself. Trees are free not because they resist the wind, but because they sway with it. Water is free not because it fights the rock, but because it finds its way around it. You become free not by defeating the forces of your life, but by dancing with them. That is why control loses its power over you. Control depends on tension, on pulling, tightening, gripping. But when you become fluid, when you become centered, when you become aware, there is nothing to grip. Imagine someone trying to hold on to smoke. They can't. It slips through their fingers. A mind like smoke, like water, like open sky. This is the mind of the lone wolf. Now, some people fear this state because they mistake surrender for weakness, but surrender is not passive. It is perceptive. It is the intelligence to stop arguing with what is already true. The wolf does not argue with the snow or the night or the hunger or the cold. It adapts, listens, responds, moves, and in doing so, it becomes the very embodiment of strength, not rigid strength, but living strength, the kind that bends and flows and survives, because it is aligned with reality instead of resisting it. You see, most attempts to control you are actually attempts to control your reactions. People don't need to imprison your body if they can imprison your emotions. They don't need to chain your arms if they can chain your attention. But once your awareness expands, once you see your reactions as simply movements of energy within the space of your mind, you realize you do not have to obey every impulse that arises. A thought appears, and you watch it. A fear arises, and you breathe with it. A judgment echoes inside you, and you smile at its theatrical flair. Everything becomes a passing visitor, and you, the host, remain untouched. This is what mystics have always called awakening. Not a dramatic event with lightning and celestial trumpets, but a simple shift of attention. A shift from being the content of your mind to being the space in which the content appears. And in that space, control evaporates. There is nothing for it to cling to. When you walk through life with this awareness, the world responds to you differently. Not because you have become more powerful in the conventional sense, but because you have become less reactive, less predictable, less dependent on external validation. People cannot manipulate someone who does not fear disapproval. They cannot intimidate someone who is comfortable with uncertainty. They cannot diminish someone who no longer measures their worth by comparison. And here is a little secret, whispered quietly by the universe itself. The very moment you stop striving to be powerful is the moment you become unshakably powerful. The moment you stop trying to be impressive is the moment you become profoundly authentic. The moment you stop trying to control your life is the moment life begins to flow through you naturally, beautifully, with an ease that you had forgotten even existed. When you train your mind like a lone wolf, you discover that thoughts are not commands, emotions are not threats, and fears are not enemies. They are simply weather, clouds drifting across the sky of your consciousness. And the sky does not mind whether the clouds are dark or bright, stormy or calm. The sky simply holds them all. This is your true nature, sky-like, spacious, undisturbed. Most people, when they hear this, begin to feel a softening inside, as if something in them has been waiting for permission to relax. They say, so I don't have to fix everything. I don't have to control my life perfectly. I don't have to fight my mind all the time. And I smile, because that is the beginning of freedom. The wolf does not fight its instincts, it learns to move with them. The river does not fight its currents, it becomes the currents. The mind does not have to fight itself, it has only to stop dividing itself. Even in your darkest moments, there is a witnessing presence inside you, quiet, steady, untouched, that has never been harmed by anything that has happened in your life. People often mistake this witnessing presence for detachment, but it is not detachment from life. It is a deeper participation in life. When you stop clinging, you begin to actually feel. When you stop resisting, you begin to actually perceive. When you stop controlling, you begin to actually live. And the world will feel this shift in you. Some will be drawn to it, like travelers seeking warmth on a cold night. Others will be unsettled by it, because your freedom reminds them of their own unexamined chains. But that is not your responsibility. A wolf does not apologize for walking with the moon. A river does not apologize for carving its own path. When you walk in your truth quietly, gently, without ego, you give others permission to do the same, whether they realize it or not. In Zen, there is a saying that the true master is like a clear mirror. He reflects whatever stands before him, yet remains unmarked by the reflection. This is the quality of the lone wolf mind, utterly present, utterly responsive, utterly free. When someone tries to project fear onto you, it is reflected back as their fear. When someone tries to impose anger upon you, it reveals their anger, not yours. You become a mirror that shows the world to itself. And yet, this mirror is not cold. It is compassionate. It is warm with understanding. Because once you have tasted your own freedom, you stop blaming others for their lack of it. You see their attempts at control as survival strategies, born of their own confusion, their own fears, their own sense of separation. And so you walk through the world not as a rebel, not as a warrior, but as a presence calm aware, ungraspable. It is from this presence that real strength arises. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to remain yourself in every situation. Not the strength to win battles, but the strength to dissolve them. Not the strength to roar, but the strength to remain silent when silence is enough, and silence is often enough. And as we continue drifting along this quiet river of awareness, perhaps you begin to sense something subtle happening within you, not a revelation that arrives with fireworks, but a soft unfurling, the way morning light slips through the branches without announcing itself. This is how awakening often begins. Not with a shout, but with a sigh. Not with tension, but with release. It is the moment you stop trying to hold the world in place and simply allow the world to be what it already is. The mind, when relaxed in this way, becomes a vast space, and in that space everything can be seen clearly. The lone wolf in the forest is not tense. Its strength comes from ease, from being exactly where it needs to be, neither grasping nor avoiding. And when your mind finds this ease, the old illusions of control begin to dissolve like mist under the sun. It is curious, isn't it, how people imagine that control makes them safe. They spend their lives tightening the fist, believing that if they hold on tightly enough to relationships, to opinions, to identities, life will become predictable. But the tighter you hold, the more brittle you become. And life has a very gentle, mischievous way of breaking whatever becomes too rigid. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. For nothing in this universe survives by remaining stiff. Trees sway, for rivers bend, clouds shift, even stars breathe in cycles. What makes you think your mind is any different? The wolf survives not because it dominates the forest, but because it understands the forest. It does not try to control the environment, it becomes part of it. It listens, senses, moves with the quiet intelligence of things that trust themselves. And this, really, is the heart of the message when you trust yourself, not the egoic self that is constantly anxious, but the deeper self, the awareness that simply sees. Then you no longer fear being controlled, because you are no longer grasping for anything. A person who clings can be manipulated. A person who flows cannot. It is like trying to push someone who is already moving in the direction you're pushing. The effort becomes meaningless. There is nothing to resist. And in the same way, when you allow thoughts and emotions to arise without resistance, their power fades. You stop being caught in the loop of reaction. You stop being dragged from one emotional extreme to another. You begin to move with the same natural intelligence that moves the tides and seasons. This is why I often say that spirituality is not about adding something to yourself. It is about subtracting, removing the noise, the clutter, the stories you've been told about who you should be, until what remains is the simple awareness that has always been there, spacious, clear, unbound. And once you experience this unbound awareness, you begin to understand why the lone wolf walks with such confidence. It is not arrogance. It is not defiance. It is the serenity of something that knows it cannot truly be harmed, because it is part of everything. When you touch this inner stillness, something remarkable happens. The noise of the world does not disappear, but it no longer grips you. Criticism loses its sting. Praise loses its grip. Approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Disapproval becomes unpleasant but harmless. You are no longer thrown around by the emotional weather of other people's expectations. You begin to sense the world as a dance, not a battlefield. But a dance, and your movements become guided by rhythm rather than fear. People will notice this shift in you. Some will find it magnetic, because deep down they long for the same freedom. Others will find it confusing or intimidating because your lack of fear reveals their dependence on fear. But whether they understand you or not is no longer your concern. A wolf does not pause in its steps to explain itself to the squirrels. It simply moves. You'll also find that your relationships change, not because you withdraw, but because you stop participating in the silent agreements that rely on insecurity. You no longer play the game of performing who you think you're supposed to be. You no longer become smaller, so someone else can feel larger. You no longer engage in emotional tug-of-war, because tug-of-war requires both sides to pull. And you have dropped the rope, not out of surrender, but out of clarity. And when you drop the rope, the game ends. This is the moment you become ungraspable, not in the sense of being distant, but in the sense of being undefinable. You are no longer the person who always reacts like this or the person who always behaves like that. You become fluid, flowing, impossible to pin down. You respond to life spontaneously, effortlessly, the way a musician improvises with the music rather than following a script. And improvisation is freedom. Even your suffering begins to transform. Instead of resisting difficult emotions, you begin to observe them the way you would observe a storm passing through the valley. There is thunder. Yes, there is rain. Yes, but there is also inevitability, beauty, and relief. You begin to see that emotions are temporary visitors. They do not define you. They do not possess you. They simply arise, express themselves, and fade away. And once you realize this, your fear of them dissolves. Most of the world's attempts at control rely on manipulating your fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of disapproval, fear of uncertainty. But when you become intimate with fear, when you hold it, listen to it, breathe with it, the power it had over you dissolves. A shadow seen clearly becomes harmless. The mind trained like a lone wolf begins to experience life not as a series of threats, but as a series of invitations. Invitations to learn, to move, to adapt, to flow. The obstacles that once overwhelmed you become part of the landscape. The moments of confusion become opportunities to discover new paths. The old patterns of reacting begin to fade, replaced by a deeper sense of choice. Not forced from effort, but arising naturally from awareness. This is what I mean by awakening, not becoming invincible, but becoming intimate with life as it is. Not becoming hard, but becoming so soft that nothing can break you. Not becoming distant, but becoming so present that manipulation has nowhere to land. Presence is the ultimate form of freedom. When you are truly present, truly here, truly connected to the rhythm of your own breath, the world cannot control you, because you are not living in the world's imagination of you. You are living in the truth of this moment, and this moment is enough. What you begin to understand is that being like a lone wolf has nothing to do with isolation. You can be among people and still walk alone in the sense that your center remains inside you, not tossed about by external currents. You can love deeply, yet not cling. You can care profoundly, yet not lose yourself. You can connect without merging, give without being drained, receive without being defined. This is the beauty of the wolf mind. It knows how to belong without being possessed, how to walk alone without being lonely. And when you embody this, you begin to see that life has always been trying to lead you here to this spaciousness, this clarity, this freedom. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every disappointment, every strange winding of your path has been preparing you to stand exactly where you are now. Not fragile, not lost, but aware. You did not come here because you were broken. You came here because something inside you was waking up. And awakening does not make you special. It makes you simple. It makes you real. A lone wolf does not walk around proclaiming itself awakened. It simply walks, and the forest responds. This is what happens to you. You walk into a room and people feel your presence before you speak, not because you are trying to be powerful, but because you have become spacious, not because you demand respect, but because you no longer negotiate your worth. And it is this lack of negotiation, this quiet certainty, that makes you unshakable. And yet, you remain soft. Softness is not weakness. Softness is the flexibility of life itself. It is what makes you resilient, adaptable, fluid. A soft mind is a free mind. A free mind is uncontrollable. And an uncontrollable mind is the mind of someone who has remembered who they are beneath the layers of conditioning. And that remembering is happening to you now. And as we drift now toward the final bend of this river, we've been traveling together. Something in you may already sense that the journey has never really been from here to there. It has always been from illusion to clarity, from contraction to spaciousness, from the noise of the conditioned mind to the silence of your original nature. And in this silence, a silence that is not the absence of sound but the absence of resistance, the wolf in you stands fully awake, not the wolf of aggression, but the wolf of awareness, not the wolf that prowls to dominate, but the wolf that walks simply because walking is its nature. This is the freedom no one can give you and no one can take away. You may recall times in your life when you felt lost, when confusion wrapped around you like fog, and you wondered whether you had missed some critical path or failed some silent test. But perhaps now you can see that every detour was part of your becoming. The mind wants straight lines, but life teaches in spirals. The wolf does not walk a perfect path through the forest. It follows scent, intuition, the subtle shifting of wind. And so have you. You have wandered into places you didn't understand, stayed in situations longer than you should have, left others sooner than you expected. All because something inside you deeper than logic, older than language, was guiding you back to yourself. Now you stand here, listening to words that are really just echoes of your own inner knowing. And you realize you were never truly off the path. You were simply learning the terrain of your own consciousness. And perhaps this is the most liberating realization of all. You cannot fall out of your own life. Wherever you go, awareness goes with you. Wherever you fall, presence catches you. Whatever breaks, spaciousness remains. You are not walking toward awakening. You are awakening to the fact that you have always been awake, always been aware, always been the quiet witness beneath the changing stories. And once you sense this, even faintly, control the need to exert it. The fear of losing it becomes almost humorous. You see that the universe has never really been under anyone's control. It dances in patterns far too complex, far too fluid, far too interconnected to be pinned down by any single will. Humans cling to control the way a child clings to a toy steering wheel in the back seat of a car, convinced that turning it changes the direction of the journey. Meanwhile, life drives on, smiling gently at your effort. But here is the miracle. When you stop trying to drive, you begin to feel the ride. When you stop gripping the wheel, you begin to sense the wind. When you stop trying to predict the road, you finally see the landscape. And in that seeing, you rediscover your freedom, a freedom that arises not from power, but from presence. The lone wolf is not controlled because it does not enter the games of control. It does not depend on validation to know its place in the world. It listens to a deeper rhythm. It responds to currents others cannot feel. It knows hunger without panic, solitude without fear, danger without collapse. Its mind is quiet, not because the forest is quiet, but because it has stopped fighting the forest. And in this way, the wolf is not separate from the forest. The forest moves through it. You begin to sense this same truth in yourself. There is no boundary where you end, and the universe begins. The breath entering your lungs has been exhaled by trees, oceans, clouds. The thoughts rising in your mind are shaped by countless experiences, memories, relationships, all intertwined with the lives of others. The emotions flowing through your body are influenced by ancient instincts, ancestral patterns, cultural stories. And beneath all this movement is the stillness of awareness, the same awareness that has been with you from the moment you opened your eyes as a newborn, long before you learned your name, long before you were taught who to be. This awareness cannot be controlled, not by others, not even by you. It is like the sky untouched by storms, unshaken by thunder, unstained by smoke. It allows everything, holds everything, witnesses everything, and yet remains itself. When you rest in this awareness, even for a moment, you discover that the fears that once ruled you begin to fade into the distance. You no longer react from habit. You respond from clarity. And this is the mind of the lone wolf, not lonely, but sovereign. This sovereignty is not a throne you sit on. It is a way of being. It is the understanding that your inner peace is not something anyone else can grant or steal. It is yours because it is you. Even when life becomes chaotic, even when loss shakes your foundations, even when uncertainty surrounds you, beneath it all is the steady hum of your own presence. And the more intimate you become with this hum, the less the noise of the world affects you. You become like the moon reflected in a lake. The surface may ripple, but the moon itself remains unmoved. And this is what people feel when they say they cannot control you anymore. They sense that you have become rooted in something deeper than emotion, deeper than thought, deeper than identity. You have become rooted in being, and being is invincible, not because it fights, but because it does not participate in the illusions that give control its power. When someone tries to shame you, the shame cannot penetrate, because you see it as theirs, not yours. When someone tries to guilt you, the guilt cannot hook you, because you no longer swallow the bait. When someone tries to provoke you, the provocation floats past you harmlessly, like a leaf drifting down a stream. And this does not make you cold. On the contrary, it makes you warm with understanding. You no longer resent those who try to control you, because you see the fear behind their behavior, you see their confusion, their longing, their aching need for certainty. And compassion arises, not the pitying compassion that says, I am above you, but the spacious compassion that says, I understand. Compassion that does not entangle you is the compassion of a free mind. And yet, even as you walk with this freedom, you remain connected. The lone wolf is not outcast, it is attuned. It hears subtleties others miss. It feels the pulse of the ground. It knows when to move and when to rest. Your awareness becomes like this. You sense the right moment to speak and the right moment to remain silent, the right moment to leave and the right moment to stay, the right moment to act and the right moment to simply observe. This intelligence does not come from analysis. It arises naturally when the mind becomes quiet. And perhaps this is the essence of the teaching. No one can control you once you realize that you are not the mind they are trying to control. You are the awareness in which the mind appears. You are the space in which thoughts, emotions, fears, and desires come and go like birds landing briefly on a branch before flying off again. You cannot control the birds, but you can realize you are the tree, and the tree does not fear the wings. When you walk into the world with this realization humming quietly within you, life becomes astonishingly simple. You do not obsess over what others think, because their thoughts are not happening in your mind. You do not fear the future, because the future never arrives as a monolith. It arrives one breath at a time. You do not carry the past like a burden, because the past exists only as a memory arising in this moment. You begin to walk lightly, like someone who has remembered. They do not need to carry the sky on their shoulders. And in this lightness, something magical happens. Your presence becomes healing to others, not because you try to heal them, but because your peace reminds them of their own. Your freedom whispers to their hidden freedom. Your calm invites their restless minds to rest. This is the influence of the lone wolf, not control, but resonance. People begin to sense that you are not living from fear, and in your presence, their own fear loosens. They feel safe without knowing why. They feel understood without needing to explain. They feel seen without being judged. This is not because you have become extraordinary, but because you have become natural, and nothing in the world is more comforting than something truly natural. You see now that the wolf walk is not about rebellion, dominance, or independence. It is about remembrance, remembering your nature, remembering your awareness, remembering that you are the unfolding of life itself. And life does not need to be controlled. It needs only to be lived. So walk, breathe, listen, be. Let your mind move like wind through the trees. Let your emotions flow like rivers after rain. Let your awareness expand like the night sky. And know that in this expansion, you are uncontrollable, not because you resist, but because you are free. You are the lone wolf, not by exclusion, but by essence. The wolf that walks with the forest, not against it. The wolf that listens to the silence. The wolf that trusts the path beneath its feet, even when the moon is hidden. The wolf whose freedom does not come from solitude, but from presence. And if you wonder whether you are ready for this freedom, simply notice that you are here, listening, breathing, aware. That is the only readiness required. The awakening has already begun. You are already walking.